Hi, and welcome to Off the Beaten Track, the only show that's bigger than the bags under Fred Allen's eyes. Look it up.
Hello and welcome to Off the Beaten Tracks. Today we have a treat. It is not this Frankie Yankovic album which I'm holding here. Hopefully through the miracle of post, this will actually be Miss Butters by the
Family Tree.
Infamous, legendary Family Tree.
Yeah,
and this is the man behind it, Bob Segarini. He was the writer and the singer.
Opshaw.
So I'm going to start before that, though. I want to start right at the beginning. You're 20 years old, around 20 years old. You're playing in the Brogues.
Okay. You went to a Wikipedia page.
You're not playing in the
I
Brogues.
was never in the Brogues. Bill Whittington was the bass player in the Brogues, who became the Family Tree's first bass player.
Uh-huh.
I was stocking the shelves one day, and there was a line of dishwashing and laundry washing products called the Family Tree, and I liked the logo. So I called the band I was putting together the Family Tree and used their logo, which was round, fit right on a drum head. So that's where the Family Tree name came from, and the Family Tree started in Stockton I stole the singer-drummer from a fantastic R&B band of these young kids called Gary Wagner and the Night Beats. So I asked Bill to join, and he did, and then we had... before I got in the band, Newman Davis playing, and he brought his friend Mike Olson, who changed his name after he didn't want to be in the band because I wanted to make records and be a rock star, and he would rather play in the clubs. So, and what happened was we went on to play in clubs, and Mike changed his name to Lee Michaels and went and became a rock star. Once the Family Tree was together, we started playing mostly original songs and some cover things.
Now,
that's when we started to go to L.A.
That's what you were tripping down to L.A. Yeah. Now, how did you get signed to RCA?
Okay. Our first single...
Now, which song is that?
Prince of Dreams, backed with the Airplane song, Live Your Own Life.
Mm-hmm.
That was recorded on a 3-track 3M machine the size of a large refrigerator in the day in his garage in Tahoe. And he took it to Mira Records, a vanity label in L.A., whose big claim to fame was the Leaves version of Hey Joe. And they put out the single and liked it so much, they asked us to do an album. So we went into Gold Star, very famous Gold Star, where Phil Spector was down the hall, Brian Wilson was down the other hall, and Sonny Bono was doing stuff on the Phil Spector record, but he stopped by every day while we were in the studio and sort of co-produced the 7 tracks that the Family Tree did at Mira. So we do these things, and we take them to Mira, and a friend of mine happened to hear them and said, I'd like to take these to where I'm working, which was RCA, a wonderful woman named Patty Farella, who eventually introduced me to Harry Nilsson, put us together, and so things. So Patty took it to RCA. RCA offered us more money than Mira. We went with RCA.
The singles that preceded the album, were these from your Gold Star recordings, or were they different?
Tragically, no. RCA insisted that we record some new things, and they liked... I played them a bunch of songs I had written, and there were 3 that they liked: Sideliner and Keeping a Secret and a song called Do You Have the Time. And out of the 3, we wanted Sideliner to be the single because it was it's still great. It was going to be the single, and then they realized or found out that instead of singing "pop" in the background, we were singing "puck" in the background. So they put out, instead of, and Keeping a Secret was a close second, but instead of making that the A side, they made Do You Have the Time the A side, which was a cute little kind of Turtlesy kind of thing.
Birdsy kind of thing.
Yeah. And to this day, the ba-ba-bas in that record, Mark Volman and I still laughingly argue about who came up with the ba-ba-bas first. you guys in Happy Together or us in Do You Have the Time.
But you also did She Had to Fly, and So He Spin, and
Those
He
are the
Spins
last two things that I did at RCA. The band was long gone.
So those are post the album.
We owed RCA a single after the Miss Butters tanked, as far as they were concerned. And He Spins Around is Mike Melvoin. It was the Wrecking Crew with me playing clavinet and Van and I singing together and Jim DeCoke on lead guitar. And the flip side, He Spins Around, or She Had to Fly was a jazz-infused thing with Mike Melvoin on the organ.
It's a little different than the other songs,
So,
but a terrific song.
Thank you. And He Spins Around is about Harry Nilsson.
Oh, yeah.
Was written after our falling out. 'Cause Harry, that's when I first found out Harry had a ridiculously dark side to him. So those are the last two things we did for RCA.
So you do a single, and it sells moderately well?
Yeah, it did. It was kind of like a moderate hit on the West Coast. But that didn't get assigned to RCA, and they didn't have that record. That was Mira.
Okay.
RCA signed us on the strength of the material I had written.
How did you manage to talk them into recording this gigantic project from a guy who's, I think you're like 22 at the time, who's had a couple of singles, and you go in and you say, I want a full orchestra, I want all these guys to come in, and I want to do this great big concept album, when there were almost no concept albums out?
In June of that year, Sgt. Pepper came out, and everybody was calling it, a story. Well, it's not, but I thought maybe it would be great to do like a rock opera, a pop opera. So that's when, with the release of Sgt. Pepper, I started writing in earnest the Miss Butters album. I even have a little booklet where I kept notes. So it took me 6 months or so to write this thing. And I did it by myself, with the exception of Harry Nilsson. I had just gotten a royalty check from Pandemonium Shadow Show, his first album. And he bought this old turtleback Jaguar sedan and drove it up from L.A. to show me, because we were best friends at the time. And while he was in Stockton, he wrote, and I don't recall exactly, he either wrote some of or all of the song One on the same piano that I wrote Miss Butters on. And we had a jolly weekend and had fun. At any rate, so he told Patty about what I was writing. Patty wanted to hear it. She came up to see the Family Tree live and then came over and I played. And she took the idea to RCA.
Did you play on the record?
No. Jim DeCoke was allowed to play a couple of solos. I don't remember in which songs. And the only one we got to have anything to do with was the instrumental 9 to 5, and that was the Family Tree live off the floor in Studio B. And we got to play on our own album. But that said, and of course now I can look back with pride and say, Al Casey was on the album, Larry Knechtel was on the album, Jim Gordon, it was the first pop rock album he ever recorded on. We did go in to watch quite a bit of the bed tracks being laid by the Wrecking Crew, but you have to realize that I think the bed tracks were done in the space of 2 or 3 days.
You've got a single out with RCA, and all of a sudden you're doing this massive thing, and you're going in and you're working with some pretty hefty people. I mean, what did that feel like? I mean, with Tipton and what's his face, Rick Jarrett had done Surrealistic Pillow.
Rick Jarrett was doing all this stuff kind of at once. The only thing he'd done really at that point was Pandemonium's Sideshow.
That they were doing almost at the same time they were doing Aerial Ballet as they were
exactly the same time.
Exactly the same time. How does that work?
Studios A, B, and C would be booked from 9 until 12, from 12 until 3, from 3 until 6. And so you worked on multiple records during a day when you worked at RCA or any major label at that time. So, of course, there were other things being recorded. I can remember going in, walking past another studio one day while we were recording, and got to see Sinatra. And another time I saw Tony Bennett. George Tipton was, of course, brought in through Rick Gerard, who had been doing Harry. And George is a sweet man. In fact, I spoke to him last year. He's in his 90s. Wow. I think. And, we did these little demos, and he wrote the charts and everything. The orchestra, you going to ask about them? And
now, were you there when the orchestra was?
No. I personally went in every chance I got when they were recording stuff because I was really interested in it. And the rest of the band usually wasn't there.
Was it dispiriting in some way? I mean, you've got this big album going on, and you're almost like removed from it until you come in and do the vocals. Sure, you've written it.
No, not at all. I was underfoot like a hamster. I kept my mouth shut and learned at the feet of these people. My problem with George has always been, he asked me what kind of orchestration I wanted, and I said, I want it like the Beatles, period. Original, unique, and creative. He took that to mean I wanted it to sound like the Beatles, which is why it is kind of a feeble attempt, like Harry stuff.
There are parts, but I don't think it's not.
In retrospect,
I've heard things that have aped it far more than this album.
In retrospect, I am very proud of that album, and I went through years where I loathed it. I hated it. Because unless you'd ever heard the Family Tree play any of those songs live, you had literally no idea how good things like Sideshow were. That said, I failed to recognize the impact that it had. I loved that record. The thing that changed my mind was realizing what it, by accident, was. And how proud I am to have been that person who did that thing.
It's a tremendous accomplishment. It's and I've listened to it. I told you, literally over the last week, I've listened to it 20 times, and it's not one of those albums that wanes on you. You can sit and listen to that album and enjoy it each and every time because there's just some great tunes in there. The arrangements are great. Your singing's great. There's only a couple of times. There's a piece somewhere which is a little bit like Hey Jude. There's a little
the end of the Miss Butters.
Yes, but apart from that, I don't. There's not a lot of. I wouldn't say you're aping the Beatles in there much.
What's been written about that record over the years, and it's been called timeless. It's been called ahead of its time. It's been called important. A lot of people I respect in the industry and in the press have said wonderful things about it.
Well, I've looked on the internet, and the word genius comes up several times in several people's adjudication of that album.
This is not my. I have other work that's far more geniusy than this work. No, I'm flattered by all of it. I think it's great, but again, I just wanted to write wonderful songs and record wonderful songs and release wonderful songs. I'm still exactly the same way. We were only in a studio for a total, and this is not every day, of 2 weeks.
But there must have been a lot of pre-production. I mean, doing all those arrangements.
Well, that was George. Tipton would just go home and write charts. I mean, he, God bless him, gave me copies of all the charts, which of course, are gone. But we really weren't there for any of the orchestras that was done at different times, different studios. But I will tell you that the band basically is the Johnny Carson Tonight Show band.
Oh, yeah.
Clark Terry was part of the band. There were some other famous names. That was kind of cool to know that these were all A-list studio musicians of strings and horns. And Clark Terry, I was a fan. When George told me he played on the record, I went, wow, Clark Terry's on my stupid album.
Where did you record your vocals?
We did, the majority of the work, including the vocals and the bed tracks, were done in Studio B at RCA.
You go in, and they're going to play this thing back to you. Now, once it's done. And you're sitting there, and there's the big speakers, and they turn it on. What's your reaction to something this grandiose from a little guy from Stockton with like a single or two out?
I don't recall ever having them call us in and sitting us down and turning up the monitors and playing us the record. I can only remember being handed a 7-inch, 7.5 IPS, inches per second,
Tape, yeah.
reel-to-reel tape of it, and taking it home and listening to it.
You didn't get a big presentation?
I don't remember if we did or not. I honestly don't remember. I do remember when we went up to play the Crystal Ballroom, of putting it on our tape recorder and our sound system, PA system there, and laying on the ball bearing loaded floor of this beautiful 20s dance hall, and cranking it up and listening to it there. And yeah, it was very impressive.
I'd read on this internet thing, this infamous internet thing, that this was recorded in mono but released in stereo.
The only way you could have multiple tracks, especially with something that included dozens of instruments, was to bounce tracks, which meant on a 4-track machine you could record 3 tracks and then bounce them down to a single track, mixed already, pre-mixed, and then you would have 3 tracks to re-record on, and then you could do it again and leave 1 track. So depending on how many things you could record at the same time, depended on how large a sound you could get. The Beatles were geniuses, George Martin, and those wonderful
Sergeant
engineers.
Pepper was a 4-track, wasn't it?
Yeah. So we're working with 4-track, but I do remember that he did a very smart thing, Rick Gerard. He recorded with stereo mics. He got the bass, drums, and Al Casey's guitar, and then he mixed that down to 2 tracks in stereo, which is why the drums can go doom 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 like that. And at the time, that was far forward thinking in Rick Gerard's part and the engineers. So it was always in stereo.
Okay.
All right. What happened was stereo was now brand new within the last 12 months, the new big deal. So, but I wasn't allowed to be around for the mix. So I said, well, are you going to do it in mono? And they said, there's really no reason to. I said, well, then can I do a mono mix? And he went, yeah, go ahead.
The reissue on CD is that your original mix?
Because
the mono
I
mix?
would only allow them to release it if it was the mono mix, unless they repaired, to me, out of whack stereo positioning. So because it was cheaper, they just did the mono. And I like the mono mix because with the right EQ and stuff, you can make it pretty big.
Yeah.
You know?
In the day, was it released in mono as well?
It was, but
so those
again,
would be probably very valuable.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you about Frankie Yankovic, which could possibly be Miss Butters.
Well, this is going to be me.
Yes. Who did the artwork for this, and how did that concept come about of the cover?
Apparently, they had a 9th grade finger painting class make the cover, which is in concept.
I see. Yeah. No.
Very nice.
Yes, you're right. That does make sense because she's a teacher.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And all these things are happening in her head, a la psychedelic, which is why people still consider this to be a smoke a bunch of pot psychedelic album. What they call psych pop.
Yeah, psych pop. I could see that.
So, well, that was the timing of the drugs, not mine. But the funny thing is that, again, over the years, I realized how quaint but accurate this depiction of the inside of her head was.
Just give us a brief outline for those who don't know the album of what the actual storyline, rough storyline concept is.
The story follows from, and this is because I was reading William Goldman, Boys and Girls Together. You ever read that book?
No.
It starts with the great-grandparents of the main characters and goes from there. It's like a huge book. So, in a nutshell, I started with the main character, Miss Butters' parents, how they met. Her father was in vaudeville and traveled a lot. He fell in love. They settled down in South and North Dakota on a little farm, so now he's happy. But he dies the same day that his wife gives birth to his daughter. So she never meets her dad. And he's referenced in a couple of other songs. So now she grows up in this little community in South Dakota. and becomes fascinated with teaching because she has this teacher in the one-room schoolhouse named Mrs. McPheeny.
Mm-hmm.
So she gets older. Mrs. McPheeny passes away down the line, and Miss Butters has become a teacher and takes over for her. And then a man falls in love with her, and she falls in love with him, but she doesn't want to give up teaching, so she chooses to remain a teacher and remain in her little town. And then it's basically, we grow older with her. Her reminiscence about lesson book life, that's being in a schoolroom is like being in life. She leads a simple life, her wants and needs are few, blah, blah, blah. And it tells her story, and then she passes away, happy to have lived a life as
Of a teacher.
teacher. My mother said she had a teacher, Miss Butters, after the fact, but this was based on a teacher. There was my first grade teacher that lived across the street from us in Stockton, named Mrs. Grady. No matter what single they put out, nothing happened with the singles, but because it apparently was that well defined that it was a thing on its own.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And the wonderful thing about that was, a few years later, I get a letter from the Joffrey Ballet in Seattle, Washington, wanting to strike Miss Butters as a ballet.
Wow.
Yeah, that's me. Whoa, this is fantastic. This is beyond wonderful. And of course, timing, the bane of my existence since time began, actually. They were ready to go. I got a letter from their lawyers with papers to sign off on giving them the rights to do this and what my shares. And then the financial people sold the Joffrey to financiers and owners in New York City, and they moved the ballet company from Seattle to New York, and of course, in so doing, let go the people who were excited about doing Miss Butters as a ballet.
Besides me, there are other people who have been fans of this particular album.
Martin Maluish and I were going to a party for, of all people, Gino Vanelli at the old Hotel Toronto. So we're in this elevator going to this party, and there's a guy on the elevator with us in a Rock of the Westies satin tour jacket. And we're talking, and Marty, in our conversation, this guy's standing over here looking out the window, and we're over there. And we're talking, and I guess my name came up in the conversation, and this kid turns around and goes, Bob Segarini. I said, yeah. And he goes, Bob Segarini wrote Miss Butters. And I said, yeah. And the next thing you know, he's monkeying me. He's like in my arms, with his feet. If he would have been like Kim Basinger, I would have kissed him. But he's not. He's this little wiry British kid. Guy. So he climbs out of my arms, and I said, excuse me? And he goes, my name is Bernie Taupin, and I used to work with Elton John when he was Reggie Dwight for Dick James, the publisher. And we got your tape of the Miss Butters album. And I sent it, a reel-to-reel tape of it, hoping that he would publish us because I wanted that credit on the album. And apparently it came across their desk, Bernie's and Reg's, and he told Martin and I, he says, we listened to it and looked at each other and listened to it again. What killed me was he said he remembered Elton looking at him and saying, we can do this. We can write our own songs and not do what we're doing here for Dick James.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's what I thought. Wow.
Started a young man's career.
So after that, I'm reading Cream magazine, and there's Elton's Hot 100, and there's the Family Tree Miss Butters album. It says it's not in, any
order of quality.
But there we are between, I think, Led Zeppelin and AC/DC or somebody at number 25 or 26. So now I'm going, I have proof. Look, Elton John said my name.
Thank you for joining us on Off the Beaten Tracks for this legendary album, and we will be back with another show with this genius.
lonely you think you are, you're never really alone so long as you've got a serial killer high on crank hiding in your basement.